Long story short, there's a couple very, generous Catholic charitable givers in the country. And I had an opportunity to meet with one of them, and his name is Jim Perry. And he runs a family fund called the Altum Fund. And, so when you get a meeting with Jim, it's like something you prepare for a lot. So like I prepared for months for this like 30-minute meeting, okay? And I went in there, I asked him,
hey everyone, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. This is the first episode of the new year. If you are new here, or as a reminder for those returning, each week on Catholic Founders, through the podcast and through our Monday newsletters, we are figuring out how to be Catholic entrepreneurs, or how to be entrepreneurs as Catholics might be a better way to phrase it. We then implement those learnings through the Catholic Founders Guild, which is our peer group of Catholic business owners who believe they are called to be instruments of God's will in the world. That's what we're all about. And as you saw in the title, today our guest is Jamie Baxter, founder of Exodus 90. For any of those unfamiliar, Exodus 90 is a company that helps organize and guide small fraternities of men in the 90 days leading up to Easter to practice asceticism to become more free from attachment to the world. You can think of asceticism as kind of exercise for the soul. We intentionally, do things like take cold showers, read scripture, deny ourselves things like alcohol or social media or sugar. And doing that creates space for God in our lives. And this helps break our attachment to the things of the world. So intentionally kind of rejecting the comforts of life in order to embrace Christ. They don't just do this, obviously, leading up to Easter. They have other kinds of versions of this throughout the year. There's things like St. Michael's Lent. So there's always something going on with Exodus 90. But Exodus 90 originally focused on just that 90 days leading up to Easter. And because we recently recorded with Jamie, and Exodus 90 is starting tomorrow, Monday, January 5th, we figured, why don't we make sure we push this thing out just in time, right before Exodus 90 starts, so in case there's anybody on the fence listening that they could do this. As an FYI, we still will have a regular episode coming out on Thursday, so stay tuned for that. This week is going to be packed full of content from Catholic Founders as we kick off the year again, really strong. Despite Exodus 90 starting tomorrow, we didn't actually spend that much time talking about Exodus 90. The key theme that we explored today was how do we develop detachment from our business in a healthy way, not pursuing wealth, social recognition, or power, but also not being detached from our business in a way that leads to product drift or to a detachment from the actual work that we're doing. For any of those unfamiliar with Jamie, he's been at this for over 10 years. So that experience plus his focus on the interior life has allowed him to really formalize and understand some of the frameworks on how to be a Catholic entrepreneur, how to be an entrepreneur in a Catholic way. And that's why I really enjoyed having him on so much. There's so much information and so many great concepts and things that he brings up in just this short conversation. We're definitely going to have him on again in the future. But I assure you, even though it's a long conversation, it is very worthwhile. So I'd recommend getting out a notebook, potentially listening to it multiple times to really soak in some of the things that he's saying. Or when something does catch your attention, rewind it and listen to it a few times just to really contemplate what he means by this. Because Jamie has so much wisdom, it would be a shame for any of us listening to not really dig in and figure out what does he mean by those pieces of information he's sharing. Before the show starts, big shout out to our sponsors, Verso Jobs. If you need to hire mission-aligned talent, reach out to Joe and the team. And Paraclete VA, if you are looking to hire offshore talent, but you want to make sure that they are Catholic, you can reach out to Paraclete VA as well in the description. And if you resonate with the content that we put out each week, consider becoming a paid supporter of this Substack. By doing so, you'll get access to the Catholic Founders Guild and all of the many perks that come with it. All right, without any further delay, enjoy this episode with Jamie Baxter. All right, Jamie, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Silas, I'm great, man. It's great to be with you. I told you before we started, you press record there that, I really never give interviews this close to a start. So this is either going to be awesome or it's going to be terrible.
Absolutely.
But we'll just see what this holds.
Listen, if people are listening to this now, it was definitely awesome because otherwise we'll re-record. I know, but I really appreciate you doing this, man. Obviously, people are quite familiar generally with Exodus 90. I think probably the majority of our listeners will be. But the reason I wanted to have you on is one of the core themes. What you guys work on, obviously, is helping people become, as you say, uncommonly free, right? But I think that one of the core themes we talk about on this podcast a lot is that Catholic entrepreneurship is not done properly or at all correctly unless we first detach ourselves from this desire for money, fame, or power, right? So that's why I wanted to have you on, is to kind of discuss this freedom, if you will, through ascetic practices, but from the perspective of an entrepreneur. So that's the main reason we're going to talk today. I think what we should do is, I would like to start with you've told your founding story many times, and I think there's people can listen to other podcasts if you talk about that in much more detail. But can you talk about your founding story from the perspective of how having a detachment from the outcomes is what allowed you to do that, like having that sort of freedom, if you will, through your spiritual life prior to Exodus 90, how that allowed you to build it in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'd say, yeah, I think there's a couple of distinctions to make. And, the first one is like, are you doing just like a Catholic business thing, or do you look at it like an apostolic work? And there's space for both. But, what I'll say here is more kind of on the apostolate side and less on just doing a Catholic thing, kind of looking at your thing as serving a market need and offering a product and, trying to market it. There's nothing wrong at all with that. It's just, I don't look at my role and my work here as that, which is to say, what anticipates everything, is something beyond you, obviously, from the Lord, discerned in prayer and experience and reconfirmed, in time. So for me, I mean, the experience set that I go back to all the time is the first 3 years, because there was nothing to show for what we were doing, like nothing at all. And I don't even know why I kept going. There's just no way to explain it. Like from I want to do my own thing, or I want to be successful, or I want to, the only reason I kept going was I felt like the Lord was asking me to. And, just the words, let my people go, have pulsed, through me, from the very beginning of this. And, when that stops, I'll stop, is the other thing. Now that it's all, 10 years later, I've been at this for a long time now. It's like, when that stops, I will stop. It's not just because it's up now that do I keep going. It's, for me, I return to that calling and I have to. And as a result, again, there was just nothing to show for it. And the only reason I kept going was because of that constant presence, but a certainty that the impact of it was in the future. Mm-hmm. And as that started to materialize in 2018 or so, after I'd been at it was people asking me, did you know it would work? And it's on a human level, not at all, but on a more spiritual level, I completely knew it would work. I just had to kind of stay at it. And I go back to that experience a lot because, in some ways, and I think most founders think this, but from the perspective of a providential view, which is how I like to look at everything, of being centered in, who God has created me to be and the son that I am, the good idea that I am in his mind, and we all are. I've needed every single stage of this thing. Mm-hmm. And there's been some highs, there's been some lows. Every year there's highs and lows. And one of the things that I've come to more fully appreciate is, as grateful as I am to get to do this, as grateful as I am for how it's been carried along by God's providence, I needed every stage of it for my own personal growth. And I think those earliest years taught me dependence, learning to be really simple with God and ask for him to be simple with me, asking for very simple things. I'm not a go-getter. I'm not extroverted. I'm a pretty interior person. I don't like screens, To be honest, there is a part of me that wishes this was just me and a parish, mm-hmm. A couple guys still. But
that's the fun part too, is that with all of these things, we always have our own perceptions of what they're meant to be or what they are supposed to be and our own preferences. And that's the fun part, is even if, in your case, I would say it's a very noble perspective, right? I'd rather it be all in person and no screens, no technology, right? It's a very noble perspective, especially in the modern era. But it's funny how God can say, you know what, I appreciate that too, probably, but we're going to do it my way. We're going to do it the way that can scale the impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And all those decisions are the ones that have to, take a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, a lot of trial and error, a lot of adjustment. But you're right. I mean, and I think that's really kind of the lesson on detachment, is whatever your mind's eye on your thing, God's plan is different. Sometimes things work out. A lot of the times they don't. And, it's a very humbling journey, for that reason. And so, that's how I kind of look at it. But that's not just a first year thing. I mean, I'm in year 10 now, and maybe we'll get into this, but there are as many answers as there are. There's more questions that I have. Every stage of any venture is different and requires different things. I was really good in the chaos of I have nothing. I'm broke for years. I don't, I was a former seminarian, so I didn't really care. I didn't have a family at the time. But now it's things are different, and I got a family. I've got, many men that work with me now, and there's a whole other level of responsibility, and there's a whole new kind of skill set, that's required for this stage. And at times I'm yeah, I'm up for this. At other times I'm gosh, I have so much to learn. And I think that's the best way to look at it, actually, is, you learn as you go, you make mistakes. And, if the call of the Lord is there, you keep going.
Exactly. And I think I want to come back to that in a second, because I think there's a whole realm of being an entrepreneur in the correct way. I say correct way. I know there's a lot of ways to do entrepreneurship, but what I mean is like with the correct disposition. If you do it in the correct way, I think there's a certain way God can bring you closer to Him. We'll come back to that in a second. I want to back up to those. You said those first 3 years, right, where you had this conviction. You said humanly maybe not, but you knew that the impact would be in the future, and you were willing to carry on for 3 years because you felt, and you still feel, this pulse of, set my people free, this kind of calling that just has not gone away. Do you think that understanding and that willingness, it was only possible because of maybe your spiritual training prior, being in seminary at the time, prior to that, leading up to that you were able to have this close connection? And the reason I ask this is because I'm sure you and I have both seen this plenty of times. There's a very fine line between conviction and believing that, God is calling you to something, and then just being an absolute crazy, right? Like you probably met entrepreneur friends who are like, they're going to start this thing, and you want to just like, no, don't do that. Like that doesn't seem like it's going to work, because you maybe have more experience than them. But on the other hand, it could be that they're actually genuinely being called to do something that seems crazy, that God's calling them to, right? If you and I were friends with St. Joseph and he just tells us one day, hey, I'm going to Egypt, with no questions asked, like leaving my business and everything, we'd probably say, hey, whoa, sit down, right? Like, are you sure about this, right? So I'm just trying to figure out, how do we discern the line between absolute like craziness and my own, like, I don't know if the word is hubris, my own belief, versus God is truly calling me to this?
It's a great question. And I think the permission that I would give is, you're going to make mistakes as you go. I mean, this is the blessing of decision-making, of discernment, from a more spiritual perspective, of the decisions that you should make, in according to God's plan. But, again, I just go back to this providential view. It's like, through the sacramental life of the church, through our baptism, and through, staying on the vine, being nourished by the sacraments in a state of grace, we are sons and daughters in the hands of a perfect, loving Father. And when you take that mentality, and not like, oh, I've got to go do this thing, or I've got to go prove them wrong, or I've got to prove myself wrong, things just really change. And at least for me, I really try to keep my view of the day very simple. I just ask for my daily bread. And so sometimes people ask me like, oh man, what's your grand vision 20 years from now for Exodus? It's like, dude, like I take this a day at a time, ask for my daily bread. I pray that the breadcrumbs are there. That's why we're talking today. It's just like, this was a breadcrumb. I needed to follow this today. And so that's why I'm here. And that's really, how I've journeyed for many years now. Now, did my background, shape this spirit? Absolutely. My father's, conversion, my mom's faithfulness early on, some priests that were very influential upon me, my time in seminary formation, maybe even before seminary. Like I fell in love with God at the age of 14, just fell in love with God and loved the church both in her mystical perfection, but also just embracing and accepting her the humanity of her members, which can be pretty subpar at times. And I loved all of that stuff. And I knew from a young age I wanted to spend my life in the service of this institution. And so I guess what I would say is like all of those experiences, right, have compounded to work for me. And I think the Exodus stuff is just kind of built, really on top of that. In terms of, discernment and decision-making, I mean, when you're centered in, a right Catholic biblical identity, there are a few things that are helpful. I mean, the first is, well, obviously a constant prayer life, and practicing the sacraments. Secondly, it's peers, it's friends, that you can share what you're up to, what you're thinking about, getting their feedback, getting their input. I think when you have close friends, they're not going to just tear you down and if they do that, you need new friends. They're not friends, but they can help to balance you out, and to maybe think about things from other perspectives. Not just peers though, you need mentors, so I have a couple older men in my life, men with decades more of experience than me. Some of them are laymen, others are priests and religious, to try to have both kind of experience sets and vocational backgrounds that help me, even now, when I'm in kind of conundrums that confuse me as to the path forward. So, I think that's very important. And then lastly, it's just a disposition of trust. It's like, hey, if you are earnestly praying, if you are practicing the sacraments, if you are seeking counsel from peers, from mentors, and there's something on you to go build, just take some steps, and let the daily bread happen or not, and sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. And even within the perspective of a company like ours that's up and running, there are many initiatives that go nowhere, and it's just like, and it's confusing. It's like, why? That was way better than what we're doing now, So So it can just be, I think it really like de-risks this and kind of de-dramatizes it as well. And I think that can be helpful, especially in the earliest stages of the discernment of a task.
Are you looking to hire people who actually care about your mission? You should get in touch with Verso Jobs. Verso Jobs is a platform that uses a gamified application process to find candidates who have the right skills and mission alignment with your team. Joe and the team at Verso Jobs first understand your needs, then they go out and headhunt the best candidates and present you with highly aligned profiles in short order, oftentimes turning around profiles within a few days. They also won't break the bank. So whether you're hiring for your startup, school, parish, or nonprofit, Verso makes it easy to find mission-aligned talent ready to build the kingdom. Visit versojobs.com to get started. That's Verso, V-E-R-S-O jobs.com. To the heights. I like that a lot. I'm curious, do you have any like just core maybe nuggets of wisdom on how to discern whether or not, especially when it comes to the business? I talk to Catholics all the time who are thinking about starting a business and they're like, I just don't know if I can take the risk. And I think on one hand, there's like, for me, I was very convinced that even though logically speaking, it sort of made sense, it didn't really make sense when I started my company. But spiritually, I was like, God showed me that this is the opportunity to start a business, right? Like he purposely had all these things happen. I won't go through the story now. And I was like, oh, I'm going to accept that as from God. So how do you, like, what's the difference between kind of spiritually as you're going through that discernment process of starting a company versus logically, does this, like, do I have a clear path to revenue, et cetera? Like, do you have any particular leanings? If you were in that situation, would you just mostly kind of like default to spiritually, what is God calling me to? Or do you think that there's some level of, hey, I'm going to still use the logic here, or do I just fully trust in God and allow him to take me if I am convinced of that?
Yeah, so I'd be careful to distinguish between kind of what you would say, like, the spiritual and the logical. So, and this is John Henry Newman's influence on me, and he really reframes the idea of faith, which at the time in 19th century England was at least started to be taught and viewed as a kind of sentimentalism, where, faithfulness essentially is following, emotions, and, it kind of reduces the whole thing to nice stories that make us feel good, but which you cannot know with reason and with certainty. And Newman just takes those ideas up and destroys them over the course of his 90 years of life. And he actually sees faith as the highest form of reasoning. And that's impacted me a great deal. And so I just don't look at those two things as separate buckets. There's, as when we pray as human beings, body, mind, and soul. And, so there is a real element to learning to trust your lights, your human lights. And there's an element of placing those, lights, thoughts, emotions into God's hand and asking for him to shape them. I think as it relates to, you asked a question about like, oh, is there a kind of a path to revenue here? I think for me, the thing that I have to fully accept in my own story is that, and this is one of the ways in which I'm deeply grateful to the Lord for how he has graciously and kindly, mercifully, worked with me through this process, is when I didn't need anything, there's nothing, and for years, right? And when I needed a little bit, like it was there, and, now that I've, 3 kids, one with God and another one coming, it's like, it's just life today it's a lot. There's a lot of responsibility there. The thing that I'm deeply grateful for to the Lord is, when Exodus grew, I kind of needed it to keep going. And so I don't know that I'm really the best one to be able to make a judgment on when you are in those vocational places to be taking great risks. I would just say that I'm really grateful to the Lord that, it's kind of followed my own kind of vocational progression. But at the same time, I'll just say really, really clearly, I have never done this to hit some kind of revenue goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to like, I don't know. Listen, at a certain stage, at the beginning, everyone's for you. As your things start to take off, it's just people just take the other sides of what you stand for. And, I think there's a disposition of, in the spirit of the Desert Fathers, of receiving good corrections, making adjustments based on those criticisms. But one of the ones that can come now is like, it's like the success factor, quote, success factor. And it's all about the money and the revenue and all this stuff. And I think my own story actually, in the many, many years, there's nothing to show for it bears out that that's just never what this has been. It's not why I kept going at the start. It's not why I keep going now, and, I think so. I do have a kind of sensitivity for others, like trying to make sense of a calling, like, because you probably do have to think through those things a lot more clearly than I had to.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with this a lot. And I think that it's really hard. I don't want to give a prescription per se again, but I do think it's kind of like the perspective that, hey, like God, he may not be too harsh on me if I decide, hey, I'm not going to pursue this thing because I can't see the revenue path for my family. But on the other hand, he also might be, frustrated at you for just pursuing a random goal because it's like a harebrained idea that I think, oh, I can become a multimillionaire for doing this. I think he might say, hey, like you got to take care of your family. But on the other hand, there's also this level of, as you talk about daily bread, and I think I just had the chance actually to finish recently the Catechism in the Year on Hallow, and at the end it talks about the prayer, and that the ending actually about the Our Father, and just like if people haven't listened to that, I would highly recommend it, by the way, especially the part on prayer and the Our Father. But talking about this daily trust in God, it is a really interesting perspective that I think we don't take literally enough. That as long as we are working hard, God will give us enough. Right. That may not be what we would like it to be. It may not be a mansion, 5-bedroom house with a porch in the front yard, but who's to say we need that, right? And the reality is, I think that a lot of times it's very hard to separate our attachment to the view of what the world thinks is like enough. And there's a whole debate about affordability in America right now. And I think a lot of it comes from my personal opinion is that most people think that what's required for living is actually in reality a luxury. But when you compare to most people's lives, they have way, way less and they get by and they have more joy, even if they have more kids and less money. So I think that there's some, I don't want to like try to sort through this all right now, but I think for people listening, really think through this aspect of, is my definition of how much money I need in any way accurate or founded upon what God might want for me, or is it based on what I want? And then getting into this point of what we're talking about today is like the detachment. What is he actually calling me to? Am I called to the entrepreneurship journey for some other reason, for freedom, to be able to have daily mass with my family, to be able to eat dinner with my family every night? There's so many different things that could be there, and it's going to be for each of you to sort out what God is calling you to. So just, find a way to have that attachment. Because I think that your story is, even though you started out without having a family, it's the same perspective, I think, for everybody as they go through this, is recognizing that at the end of the day, I could work 100 hours a week and still not have enough money if God doesn't want me to. That's when I started my company. I said the same thing. I said, if 6 months go by and it's not working, even though I really don't want to, I'll go get another job somewhere else, right? And on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, I got a big contract and it just barely started working in time. So I put that to Our Lady. But again, I agree. At someday it could all stop, and that's okay. I accept that too. So any commentary there?
Yeah, to your point on, what do you need to do the will of God? Nothing more than you have.
Exactly.
So I've just found this prayer card, actually. It's Mother Teresa, and it has a little relic of one of her veils. And just in my prayers with this prayer card and kind of reflecting upon her recently, it's just, you don't need more than you have to do God's will. And I think the other like kind of carve out and permission that I would give is I read recently that 75% of Americans want to start companies, kind of be self-employed, but 6% are. One of the things, at least a few years ago, I don't know if this is still true, Silas, but there's just a lot of momentum in, be an entrepreneur, start your thing, whatever. And some of that was helpful to me. Other than that, didn't really resonate with me. But I would say, like, as Catholics, we are institutional people. And what does that mean? It means that even when God becomes a man in Christ, what does he do? He sets up an institution, which we are so fortunate to be part of, as members of his body, the Catholic Church. And, which is to say, with governance, with leaders, with authority, with structures, all that stuff. The family as an institution. Those are our primary institutions, the families we come from. The father and mother we are commanded to obey and to respect, and the families that, in God's will we grow, with a life partner and companion. These are the institutions at our core, but those are kind of our primary institutions. But beyond that, it's like there's institutions to build. And I say this because, afoot for a while now has just been a real deinstitutionalization in the world, but also in the church, where we just like tear down institutions. And you see this in the church too, justified for all kinds of reasons. And I don't think that's the Catholic vision at all. And I think actually that obviously, we need to live lives of integrity and wholeness and striving to become temples of the Holy Spirit. But we do so with, for our institutions, for the betterment of our institutions. And I say all of this to say that, for those on the cusp of building or not, there is not a pressure to go build something. And I think the vast majority of us should, play a part in renewing the good and necessary and essential institutions like our parishes, our dioceses, etc. I have nothing but respect for people who don't try to create things, but do faithfully commit to renewing their local institutions. I've got nothing but respect for that. And, I would say, it takes all the, I told you earlier, like, it takes a lot of prayer, a lot of discernment, a lot of confirmation from God, from others, from mentors that you should start something. And I would say, there's no pressure to do so. So even in your comment earlier, I just sense this, like, God will have a harshness about this or think this or frustrated about this. And I think we should think about building Catholic institutions differently. Everything's unfolding just as it should in His providence. We all have a part to play. And if we're called to venture into a new institution, give it a shot. And the daily bread will bring that to be in time. And if not, you're still called to venture, in renewing the institutions of the church.
I agree with that a lot. That's, I think, a really valid point and something that seems to be really challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs I encounter who are Catholic, who are very faithful to their like spiritual life generally, and they're building their business and they're really putting in the effort to build this thing. But it's hard to convince them to spend time integrating with the parish, for example, like sitting down with their priest and saying, hey, what do you want to build here and how can I be helpful, right? And I think that there is this, I think you've put your finger on it very well, that there is an interest in sort of this selfishness. And this is, again, where I find this whole conversation about Catholic entrepreneurship very fascinating because generally speaking, secular entrepreneurship tends to focus on the self and, the chip on the shoulder kind of attitude in a lot of cases. And it's about, what can you build? What can you have? And we're not here to do that in the first place, right? We're only stewards of what God has given us, our skills, our interests, our financial talents, etc. All of these things are, we're just here stewarding them, and we have to do the best job we can. And that doesn't always mean building your own thing. So I appreciate the comment there. I want to go in two directions here. So first, can you go back to that comment you made earlier, but now that the business is a little bit bigger, I think you guys have something like 40 employees or something like that?
No, there's 7.
7. Oh, 7. Okay. It's much smaller than I thought. So you've got some people on your team. Okay. And the company is a little bit bigger. You've got a lot of, you guys have seen a lot of success. As you get to this point, you mentioned that in that process of doing this, that God in some ways has brought you closer to Him, right? Can you just talk about that experience and understanding that day-to-day aspect of the feeling of responsibility and how you manage that and how it brings you closer to God through the journey of entrepreneurship and through the growth?
Yeah. So I just say as it relates to you, so you thought we were about, more than 4x what we are, which is humbling. I mean, a lot of people do. So we kind of get thrown into our friends at Hallow and Ascension a lot. And it's like they're like 25x bigger than us in basically every way. So I don't know. There's a real need for distinctions in the institutions that are kind of up in a foot today. And we're really quite small. Now, part of that's intentional on my part. I would say, so times in the beginning we're pretty tough. Okay, for years, as I mentioned, and they would be impossible for me today, and I don't want to say they were tough as in like a bad thing or negative thing at all, not to make a judgment on it, but as the company grew, I knew that I wanted to provide good jobs for the men that were willing to come here. And part of that is economics. Part of that is just making a direct impact upon our work, having a responsibility, which I think leads to the greatest feeling of meaning and fit within a company. And so I would just say, our staff could probably be two times bigger than it is. But, I'd say the other dynamic within like the Catholic space is like, at least when I was starting, you were maybe doing Catholic things, but you're doing 4 other things as well. And just doing so many things to try to make ends meet. And so I've just tried to take a different approach, which is, we have really good jobs, I would say. And it's not to say that guys, don't leave, and they can leave for all kinds of reasons. But I've just tried to make sure as an employer, like meaningful work is there, well compensated work is there from a justice element. And I think about this from the perspective of, I don't want our guys to have to do a ton of things, and I don't want their spouse to have to work if they don't want to work. And I think that leads to, it really keeps the family as the primary institution and doesn't allow for work, even good work like what we do, to kind of creep into places that it often can, but at least, in my little domain, I didn't want to be the case. As things have moved though, Silas, like as you experience traction, opportunities come your way. And it's really exciting actually, because in the beginning, you're just like outreaching, and you're being vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there. And especially if you're more introverted than not, it's painful. It was for me. And as things move though, it's like opportunities open, and then it's like you don't need to start all the conversations. Like people start them with you, and just that very simple human dynamic is actually, at least to me, was very much a relief.
Mm.
However, at the same time, you can absolutely creep from why you exist and why your thing is actually working at all. And so I would say over the last 3 years, so starting in kind of year 6 or 7, we got really focused as a core team, namely me and my brother, on why do we exist? What are the charisms that we believe animate our work, that we've observed, in our team, but also in the men that we serve, where we see obvious fruitfulness, not just numbers, but spiritual fruitfulness, transformation. What are those charisms? And what I have tried to do over the last 3 years is ruthlessly, judge everything through, these couple of filters for us, which is why, we are so focused on freedom and why we are still so focused on, prayer and asceticism with the support of local fraternities. There's a lot here that I've been saying now for 10 years. And the truth is I'm not saying it. I'm just like picking up on things that 10 years ago felt somewhat neglected by the tradition, and even beyond me was, very much in the culture of this brotherhood that I was in the seminary with, some young priests and, a priest mentor. I just say like, that emphasis though on focus has been something that has been very simplifying for me. And there are expansions though that are required. So within the last year, as an example, we said yes to an adventure to do this podcast, this YouTube series on the Desert Fathers with Bishop Eric Varden from Norway. And it was my idea, but he said yes, and I couldn't believe it. And so we just went for it. And, we spent a ton of time on this, ton of time. And it was the most, honestly, it's probably the highlight of the last 10 years, honestly, was this series. And that was like the first new thing we've done in a really, really long time, And so now that we did it, I mean, in some ways I'm grateful it's 26 because it was so much. And while we're hopeful we'll renew the series in 27, we can kind of like refocus on the fundamentals that make Exodus 90 work. And so that's really the journey that I've been on with our team, is not so much going broad, and not trying to replicate what I think others in the space are doing really well. Instead, I like to focus on, okay, so just to like play all the cards. So like, I don't really read business strategy books. I find them to be mostly nauseating and unhelpful, and just don't really connect with kind of our spirit. But one that's been really helpful to me is called Blue Ocean Strategy. And it's not new. It's out of Harvard Business School like 20 years ago. But I think it really is awesome if you are a Catholic building something you feel like God has called you to do. And the reason it's awesome is because it's all about not competing, quote, competing with others in the same way that they're doing it, but it's all about intentionally not competing with the things that they're doing well, but focusing on new creations. When you do that, they call it, value innovation is what they say. I kind of hate those words, but it's you swim away from, the red waters is what they say, and into blue ocean. So, okay. So that's what we do. Like we just like, and so sometimes when I do feel other groups kind of wade into our waters, I do the opposite of what I think a lot of founders would do. I don't like get upset, go try to whatever. I mean, I guess there's been some moments where I felt like a correction was in order on my own integrity, and I've not been afraid to make those either in person, not on the internet, but in person. But in general, it's like, okay, if they're going to go this way, where's God calling us to go now? And so what's so interesting about this is when you survey our guys, for the first time last year, we asked which of our competitors, which is not a word we use internally, but we asked it because everyone uses it. Which of our competitors did you think about, before you decided to join an Exodus 90 fraternity? 90% of those responses said something like, I am not aware of a competitor. And that's awesome. Like that means it's working. And so, that's kind of the framework that we use for how we grow. So I like Blue Ocean thinking because it allows you to really focus on why you exist, why God's brought it to be, and how, the Holy Spirit has made you fruitful. And it keeps you away from doing things that everybody else is doing, and they're probably doing it better than you, and it's stressful and all this stuff. And it kind of keeps you in a freer space.
No, I like that a lot. I think that's I won't go into the whole tribe about this, but the idea that we have unique callings, and based on our whole history, where we were born, like who we were born to, all these things, like they play into this. Like, what is our unique calling? And they may not be blue ocean in the sense that they're completely unheard of, but there will be spaces within the space that you operate in that you are uniquely called to be working in. And it's so motivating to realize that we do have every one of us has that sort of calling. And that's not, again, like you said earlier, it doesn't mean starting a business per se, but it might mean where you are specifically, who are you in front of, like who are the people in your life that you are called to witness to and to help transform in some way. So I like that a lot. At this point, you've heard me mention our mission many times. We are building an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who are committed to reinserting God into the culture. Well, if this mission resonates with you, we want you to be a part of Catholic Founders Guild. You can think of this kind of like an association of Catholic business owners who share the same mission and who take this idea of bringing God into the culture extremely seriously. We are currently around 50 members and growing quickly. So when you become a member, you can find other Catholics to do business with, to buy services from, to invest in, and alongside. All of this is possible with our member directory. On top of that, we have 2 to 3 calls every month with the community. One to discuss a particular topic like stewardship or competition, one to learn from an expert and ask them questions, like our recent one on the tax changes with Chris Royalty, or on how to grow your business in a virtuous way with Ellen Twomey. The other that we have is a more open-ended community hangout call. There's no specific time commitment for this either, so if you want to be heavily involved, you're welcome to. But if you just want to be a member of the guild and don't have time to attend the calls, all we ask is that you stay committed to this mission of building for God rather than for yourself, and be open to meeting other members of the guild when they reach out. To join, the first step is to upgrade to a paid membership on our Substack. Think of this kind of like a Patreon if you're not familiar. Just go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so anybody can afford it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, many of the members have ended up finding customers from within the group within a few months of joining. So what I'm saying is, you're likely going to get your $100 back, if not in direct sales, at least in other value and advice from the guild. Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. All right, see you on the inside. Now, let's talk about as you get to the point you know, the company is running and everything's, again, there's always ups and downs with companies, but let's just say, overall, the company's running, it's going smoothly enough, right? On the aggregate, how do you remain detached at that point? So how do you remain detached from the outcome of it growing every year? How do you remain from the outcome of like, hey, maybe at some point God's calling us to not do this? How do you remain detached? Maybe also from a financial perspective. I know that's not your main goal, but how do you do that? Because I can imagine, I'm not quite at that point, but every time I grow in success with my company, it is harder to remain detached from the outcome. So I'm curious if you have perspectives on that and any practices that you do specifically for other entrepreneurs to consider as well.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I would say, listen, I mean, entrepreneurship is tough and it's very humbling. I heard, maybe it was Elon even, who said something like, it's like staring into an abyss, chewing glass. And when I heard that for the first time, I was like, yeah, I can feel that, for sure at moments. And so I would just say, like, the thing to step back and to remember is if you don't cultivate a sense of enough, you will never be satisfied. And so I'll say this from my perspective. If you would have told me, 7 years ago where we would be from a, team size to impact size to just kind of an overall structure size, I would have been like, I can't even believe it. This is amazing. How did we do it? Whatever. But now it's like, but we're not, at the next stage. And my point in saying is that I do think just the process of starting is so humbling. If you maintain the disposition of a son and a daughter, it's so humbling that just the process really purifies you. But even as you experience, traction or momentum, it's never, quote, enough, which is why it's such a practice, a disposition to just be like, hey, we have enough. And I'm grateful for that. And so I just say that, I've been really humbled by, and it's really remarkable. I mean, what's happened. It's, I'm grateful for it. I mean, it's amazing actually how many men around the world now resonate with the mission and the charisms of Exodus 90. My disposition though is I try to stay in a space of it's for who it's for. If it's not for you, that's okay. I mean, it's a big, beautiful church, and I'm trying to reach the men that it is for. Who need an exodus at this moment in their life, who need to find greater freedom. Which is ultimately all about responding generously, uniquely to the call that every one of our men has, for their lives. So that's just the spirit that I try to maintain. I would say there's so many times like where, there's moments where, gosh, this went so much better than I thought. And there's other moments like this went so much worse than I thought. Like, I can't, and it's like, this is growing slower now than I thought that it would grow. But then there's these other moments that are just like out of nowhere that are like, wow, like that really became something. So I think what it does over time is, it really mellows you out. And it really just, I mean, and it's just, it's easy to say like, okay, our successes, quote, are not ours. Like that's the Lord, bearing fruit in us if we're on the vine, at least if we're bearing fruit that will endure into the kingdom. But in the same way, the quote failures, which I don't love the word, are also his too. And it's not like I look at some of the things inside that have not worked with regret. It's just, hey, for whatever reason, it just didn't quite work out as we thought, and learning to surrender those moments as well. And then just getting back to a place where like, I always have enough. I always have my daily bread, just like Israel had daily manna, except on Sundays when, or on the seventh day when they rest, but they have enough from the sixth, like that is the spirit, really that we have to maintain, and I do think it's so important to detach from the couple of stories in the space that are just insane. So it's like, with the Hallow guys, and I'm friends with all those guys, like their story is so unlikely and is top 0.01% of any startup in the world, and not even just of our own space. We are a fraction, of their size. And I was in small groups with Alex when we were both kind of starting up, and I'm grateful because the Lord has allowed me to, see their own trajectory, as grand as it has been in so many ways. But then also just to acknowledge, like, it's just so not my trajectory, like I just don't understand so many of the things that go into making their work as it is. And I've tried to stay focused on the things that I know, and to be grateful for the men that we get to serve. And I'm grateful for as long as we get to, as long as that might be.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm going to try to put this in terms maybe that other people can also look at it from different angles. In general, what you pointed out is that the status of the current situation is only understood properly when you recognize where you looked at it from the beginning. So if you put yourself back into the shoes of day one and you look at where you are now, you mentioned you're grateful, right? I think about this all the time whenever I do remember that, hey, when I was 16 years old, thinking about what is my life going to go, I did not think I could get to where I am now, and I'm extremely grateful. But then when I sit myself in the moment, I tend to be like, oh man, where's the next thing? Always a little bit more. And having that recognition gives us the, back to your point about faith and reason, gives us the logic argument to recognize that, hey, if that is the case, if I have this tendency to naturally become wanting more, this mimetic desire to always want more, then in order to combat that, I must have a practice of quiet or reflection, and somehow, whether that's daily or weekly, at the bare minimum weekly, to recognize and be grateful for what I have and where I'm at in my business. And then to constantly re-anchor back to the point of recognizing that I don't need anything other than what I have, like you said before, but God will give me what he needs. And if I can do that, then we can start to develop the recognition that this current quote unquote success is not relevant necessarily to our future, to our salvation. What matters mostly is that I just keep doing the work that's been put in front of me, and make sure that I do acknowledge it belongs to God. And if it all goes away tomorrow because he desires it, that's okay. And I think that to me, this theme of having time to think has always come up over and over and over again on these conversations. And it's something I think the early stage entrepreneurs tend to be really tend to struggle with, because they're just struggling to make sure the business keeps running. They have a little bit of anxiety around keeping it going, especially if they're not doing it necessarily from a mission perspective, right? They're just doing it because they want to provide for their family. It's really hard to say, I'm going to set aside time to go to daily mass. I'm going to set aside time for adoration every week. But if you do it, it will lead to better outcomes. Like, and you shouldn't do it for that reason. You should do it because it's the right thing to do. That's what I understood from what you just shared. Is that's how I think it comes down to. Is you have to bake into your plan of life some time for reflection and recognizing those items, because it keeps you grounded, right?
It's so true, so true. I mean, in your plan, at least as a starter, it's like you got to have silent time. You got to have silent time. I would say, most of my morning, so we don't, as a team culture, like we don't do meetings in the morning typically. I want everyone, reading, writing, thinking, praying. That's the most important thing. Like if you can get that right, then you can save the other things, for the afternoon when, maybe, I think we're all a little less fresh. That's the time for meetings, marketing things, whatever it might be, So I think that's really important. At the same time, like, I think there's a way of getting detached too, that you don't want either. And this is something that I've tried to work against in my own experience. A couple of years ago, I just noticed, like, gosh, like I'm just like too much in the clouds and I'm not close enough to the work anymore. And so I just took active strides. I mean, especially over the last year of like doing a lot of things that I think many people would say I shouldn't be doing at our stage. For example, this year I just decided, a couple months ago, we were thinking about who we wanted to lead Exodus 90 this year. And we were just praying over it. And I really felt like God is like, hey, it's your year, man. And so I just spent the last couple of months, it's just in the morning, it's me, it's the book of Exodus, doing my best to write. And I used to do a ton of writing, and I really, just in the pace of building a company, I got away from those kinds of things. And that was scary. It's like scary to like, it's just me, the book of Exodus, pad, or my little writing app. And it was so fruitful though. I mean, it was so fruitful to just kind of re-enter into our foundational story. And, and so I would just say like, I think every starter feels this way. There's these moments where you need to go kind of work on it. But there is time to really stay in it and to really stay close to those that you serve, and learn how to do that is also very hard. And I've made some mistakes about this too, of everyone will quote like Amazon on trying to be a customer obsessed thing. But when you're reaching a lot of people, that's hard to do. And you can actually take on many other voices that are nothing like, in our case, our core man. And so there's been a lot of trial and error in how to do that well. But I think both elements are important. Taking the time for silence, reflection, especially in the work that we do. I mean, apart from the contemplative life, that's what we are doing makes no sense to me. And apart from that contemplative life of our whole team, I don't think anything that we are doing would bear fruit now or later. But I would just say it's also important to, stay, as important as it is to go high level, to just stay in the work, stay close to the work, which is why like we don't have any full-time managers at Exodus. Tried that for a little bit, just was not a great place for us. That's where meetings compound and conversations about things that you don't need to talk about happen. And so from me down, everyone is very close to the work, which means there's not a lot of redundancy. But there's a lot of meaning. And that's what I tell the guys. It's like, yeah, there's not a lot of redundancy if something breaks. If somebody's sick for an extended period or something, it would be really hard for us. Mm-hmm. But in place of that, there's a lot of meaning at work, here. And, that's worked for us.
Yeah. This is, I brought this up a few times before, but St. Thomas Aquinas talks a lot about this idea of connection to your work and the purpose of the work. And if you are so removed from it as the executive, right, this is what you look at, like how GE, was a great company and then just really had this downfall over many decades because they were, their executives were taking separate elevators and all these things, right? They were completely disconnected from the customer. And I could go on a lot of tangents here. I'll just keep it to that. But we have to be connected in some way to our customer, because what's the purpose of what we do? If we're entrepreneurs and we're not entrepreneurs for the sake of making money, because that's not the goal. If the goal is to carry out God's will in the world, then what is the goal? If the goal is not to make money, it's to serve the people that are around you, right? And to do it so well that you treat them the way Christ would. If he was a customer service representative, how would Jesus treat the customer, right? Those things, whatever your role is, just imagine what would Jesus do in my shoes if it was his job to do this job in this company or to run this company, right? I think that'll give you a deeper purpose and more fulfillment in everything you do, and it'll lead to much better outcomes too, right? Which is not the reason you should do it. You should do it because it's the right thing. The one thing is, if I understand correctly, you guys started out as a nonprofit and then became a for-profit. Is this correct? First of all, before I ask the rest of the question.
Yes, that's true. Okay. And it switched about 3 years ago. Okay.
So this is from a really kind of tactical perspective. I am really curious your take on, first of all, maybe why you started out as a nonprofit and why you changed to a for-profit. But also out of that, I'd like to understand, if somebody is thinking about starting a company or an organization, should they do nonprofit versus for-profit? And in what case, for what?
Yeah, so I have the unique circumstance of being in both. I think
you did it before OpenAI made it cool.
Yeah, certainly. When I saw that story, I was like, wow, yeah, I've been there. But I would say it's important to like really get the right context on it, because people can really misinterpret what that means and why. For starters, I actually didn't make the decision to be a nonprofit at the beginning, and I didn't fully make the decision to convert from a nonprofit to a private company. So as a nonprofit, you have a board And that's the governing body of the organization. That's where we got started 10 years ago. That's where everything was. So sometimes people will bring this up like, oh, why does this cost money? There's money involved. Like, why don't you go fundraise this? And I have the unique story of like, I did try to do that for 7 full years, actually, literally flying all around the country to try to raise money for Exodus and our needs to just keep it going. And in a much larger, institutions in the church, what you will often hear is like fundraising is a part of the mission, like at Focus or whoever. And it's definitely true. But when you are starting from nothing, okay, when you are starting from zero and there's just a couple of you involved, all of the time you spend fundraising, which is a lot of the time, directly takes away from the experience that you can try to create, for the people that you serve. And so for years, just was, it was just kind of in the setup. It wasn't working really well, which is why, and it wasn't working well because it's hard to fundraise for new nonprofit institutions. Those who can do it, I have nothing but respect for them. It's hard to do. And I mean, you can spend hours and hours and days chasing gifts that just never come at all. And so, I would just say, that's really where it was. I realized early on, like, okay, I'm just not going to be able to fundraise this. Like, this has got to have a sustainable economic model or this thing will never work, which is why from the earliest days, like Exodus has always cost something, and we've tried so many things over the years, and I'm sure we'll try many more things, as we move forward. But there's always been a kind of economic engine to it. Well, as things started to gain momentum in 2018, 2019, that just really started to take off, and it really dwarfed the fundraising kind of aspect of the nonprofit. But it was still not quite enough, I would say. At least, so I just want to separate this because I just talked about how important it is to cultivate a spirit of enough, okay? And I was just at peace with, okay, this thing will never be what it could be. But gosh, with a little bit more help, like this could really be something. And this was really something that I carried. And I actually thought I had some really hard years where I was like, I'm just so obviously in the wrong structure. And it was really painful for me. I would say probably 2020 to 2021 or 2022. It was just like, I felt like we really kind of stagnated. It was just in many ways, we were just kind of staying the same. And it was just because we were doing what we could do and working hard. And I really think back on those times and the other, the men that were involved at that time with a lot of gratitude because we were just doing what we could with what little we had. So anyway, long story short, I had a fundraising meeting with there's a couple very, generous Catholic charitable givers in the country. And I had an opportunity to meet with one of them, and his name is Jim Perry, and he runs a family fund called the Ultim Fund. And, so when you get a meeting with Jim, it's like something you prepare for a lot. So like I prepared for months for this like 30-minute meeting, okay? And I went in there, I asked him for a charitable gift, and he was just like, hey, like what I am seeing and how you were talking about this in the future, I think that could be, it's like, you just don't really sound like you're in the right place. So Jim, through profound personal generosity, acquired, all of the nonprofit kind of assets, and we restarted the company in 2022 on St. Michael's Day as a private entity. Most of the time, nonprofit transactions are because something doesn't work, but there's still something valuable. So, there needs to be a fair value, paid for that. And that's typically distributed to charity. In our case, it was working, and so he had to pay the fair value of it. And no person, myself included, very important to say, no person can benefit from a nonprofit transaction like that. I received nothing from it personally, nor did anyone on our team or on the board or whatever. And those funds started a new group, and they're working on a program right now called the Knights Templar, which is trying to help with the formation of boys, and they have this whole and it comes from the same priest who was involved in the early days of Exodus 90, named Father Brian Dorr. But this was a fraternity that had been started in our diocese, in 1999, I think. I mean, a long time ago, and it's just borne a lot of fruit. So they're trying to replicate that nationally, and they're doing the best they can there. But the whole staff basically went with the new group. Essentially. The other thing I like to say about this is, so this provided the ownership opportunity that corporations have, but nonprofits don't. And so I have to this day, the old nonprofit has a partial stake in our company now, and the family fund, the family charitable fund, has a stake in our company. So the thing that is also very surprising about our case is everything that Jim owns of our company is he's pledged to distribute to charity. So he's a huge supporter of the Catholic pro-life movement, Catholic education. He helped get Word on Fire and Focus started. Basically, if he should see anything from us in the future, which he hasn't seen anything today, because you obviously, at our stage, you reinvest everything into your future. which is something that also people have no idea about. Apparently, but if he should see anything, all of it will be distributed. And then it provided an ownership opportunity for me, which I, chose as well to distribute to every employee. So every employee of our company is also an owner. So that, and I pledge to do this for future employees as well, that, you can own the thing that you work through your labor to make. And I think there's something deeply Catholic about those values. So anyway, when people hear like, oh man, it used to be this nonprofit thing and now it's this private for-profit thing, it's like the inability to make distinctions between like where we are and like Tesla is just absolutely insane. And it's really important, actually. I do think part of this is this whole deinstitutional kind of thread running through culture today. We need so many more Catholic institutions, both nonprofits, and for-profit, companies. And if that's like going to be the thing that you're upset about the couple companies employing all of like 250 people. It's like, dude, get some other cause, please. It's like, how cool is it actually that, through hard work and the inspiration of God and through his faithfulness, like some nice, kind of enterprises, if you will, are starting to blossom, which enable for Catholic work to happen, and for enable people to not only volunteer, but to work full time, to support the message of the gospel according to their capacity. So all that's to say, I think we need a lot more of just Catholic, initiatives.
Mhm.
And as it relates to like, do I go private or for profit or go nonprofit? Having been in both, I just say like, you got to remember, structures guarantee nothing. I've seen really strange things in nonprofits, and I've seen shockingly, generous things in private companies that didn't correspond to incentives at all. And obviously, you see the other, vice versa. Everything comes down to the heart. That's where the battle is. And that's why it's so important, though, in a private company to be, to have a governing board that shares your principles and your charisms, but the same is true in a nonprofit setting. And so I would just say it depends on what you're doing, if there is a kind of a sustainability path. And, so I don't look at it either as like, oh gosh, don't go nonprofit. Because like I can kind of sense some of that too, as kind of Catholic private stuff has taken off. It's a kind of skepticism about nonprofits that I don't think is healthy either. So it just depends on who you are and what you're doing.
Quick interruption. If you're a Catholic business owner feeling bogged down by the administrative busy work that prevents you from moving your business forward, I have a solution for you. My EA and I started Paraclete VA to bridge a specific gap, connecting Catholic entrepreneurs with high-quality Catholic virtual assistants around the world. Several members of our Catholic Founders Guild have already used this service, and by offloading that administrative and marketing tasks, they've been able to do the work that moves their businesses forward without any of the important admin tasks getting dropped. From finance to customer success, to marketing, to content creation, to general admin, we can find you what you're looking for. The cost is simple. $500 when you hire and $500 if you're still happy 30 days later. If you're ready to stop doing repeatable tasks so you can focus on the things that actually move your business forward, email us at admin@catholicfounders.com. Tell us what you need. We'll make a handful of introductions. You interview and you hire. Most of the time, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks to make a hire. It's that easy. So what are you waiting for? All right, back to the show. I mean, there's a couple core things that we should focus on is that you have to recognize that there's going to be limitations of both, right? And sometimes you're called to do one or called to do the other. Recognize that just because you're trying to do some sort of, just because you're trying to integrate the faith into what you do does not mean you should be a nonprofit, right? I think that a lot of people, when they first talk to me, they if they haven't read through a lot of the Catholic Founders stuff that we put out, they're like, oh, well, I'm not like a publicly Catholic company though. And I was like, well, that's fine. Right? We actually want more Catholics who run businesses, not necessarily Catholic businesses, right? Because we need to serve all customers and bring Christ to everybody, right? It doesn't mean, some people are obviously called to serve Catholics specifically, but we are called in many cases to just be in the world that God has put us into, whether that's Catholics or non-Catholics. And recognize that in a lot of cases, the for-profit entity route will be the right one. That doesn't mean you have to prioritize profit over all things just because you are for-profit, right? Just because that's the current prevailing wisdom. So I appreciate you sharing that.
So the other thing though too that I want to just like kind of speak into, because you picked this up, it's like, oh, if you're a for-profit, it's just for profit. And it's just like so out of touch with the reality of building anything. And I never hear this from people who actually build things, just people who talk about people who build things. But it's like when you grow, if you're a starter, you reinvest it immediately into future impact. You don't think, oh, great, I can go take this for me, or whatever. It's like, so for us, it's always meant another job, or, we'll try another, marketing initiative. Right now, for example, we're really focused on our Central European programming, which is kind of starting to blossom, and we're very excited about it. So I just think that, like, you read these things on Reddit and it's just like, hey, go try to build something and talk to me years later.
Yeah.
Because, and it's harder than it seems. And having run both a nonprofit and a private company, like, my compensation setup is not very different, not at all. My lifestyle's not any different. And, so I just say, there's a lot of misconceptions out there that I do think heal when you actually get close to what it's actually like in reality.
Yeah. And I would also point out that I think probably a large number of people who start businesses, they do want to make some sort of impact. I think that especially, maybe not the first business sometimes, like maybe that they're coming out of poverty, they're trying to just sort of like have money. But then usually I shouldn't say usually, almost in every case, when people exit a business or they achieve some material success with their first enterprise, their second enterprise is completely different. They are not doing it solely for the purpose of money, because they've already gone through depression and realized that money's not going to solve their problems. They need to make an impact in the world. They have to climb their, as a lot of people like to call it, their second mountain. And so a lot of people are intending to make some sort of impact. There's a reason why the people who they build a successful business and they're taking substantially more income than their bottom employees are getting, for example. And if it's well known, there's a reason those companies tend to struggle, because maybe the disposition of the owner is not in the right spot. But we could talk about the whole other tangent in another time. But I think that it's just very important for what you said, people to recognize that it's a very different pursuit once you get into it than it looks like from the outside if you're not somebody who has done entrepreneurship. And for me, like, I've read books about business and entrepreneurship and listened to podcasts for, I don't even know, let's say it'd be 6 or 7 years. No intention on that one. It was so different than once, even though I like really absorbed this information, once I got into entrepreneurship, I started to actually understand what the people were saying. I was like, oh, now it makes sense. Like, now it actually clicks, because I heard it 100 times, but until I was in it, it didn't make sense. So
yeah. So just stepping back on this, if we can. So
Yeah.
the entrepreneurs who have influenced me the most are not Catholics. They're named Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansen, the Basecamp guys.
those guys are
And
great.
I love these guys. You have, as a Catholic, you got to sift through elements of them that are not quite aligned, with our values. But one of their big things is, like, they've been at it for 25 years, and they could have sold the thing twice to Sunday, but they saw their friends do that, become miserable, and they learned to have enough. And now, admittedly, over time, they've become very successful. It's probably one of the most successful, SaaS companies, honestly. And it's so cool. I'm so for them, because they're competing against companies with hundreds of millions of dollars and, with these multi-billion-dollar valuations. And they've always just been a team of 12 to 40 to, I think they're at 60 now. And, but that's one of their big things, is like, they're just going to be at it till it's time to be done. But there's not this dream of some exit to go do something else. And that just really resonates with me. It's just like, what would I go do? It's not to say there are not moments where I'm just like tired. There's a struggle. I want to quit. All that happens too. I think that happens to anyone who's honest with themselves, or other moments when you're just bored of, like, working on the same thing. But I remember Jason and David, and they're the few voices. It's so important to really filter who you listen to. I do listen to them, and I just recommend them to, especially, people early in the journey or thinking about it. I think they can help give some nice, like, Midwest, kind of traditional thinking to starting something, and just, like, really turn off all the coastal valley garbage, which is just so unhelpful, especially if you're doing a Catholic thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, those guys are great. I really like Jason's writings, have been awesome over the years. Cool. Well, you already answered one of my questions. We'll move into rapid fire. I mean, we didn't obviously cover most of the stuff on our docket, but that's all right. We let the spirit guide the conversation to whatever extent. So let's go through some rapid fire, and then we'll end. So what is your favorite scripture, or at least favorite scripture now, maybe? Because I'm sure you've got a lot in your head.
Yeah, this has changed over the years. When I was a young man, I loved, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I live, but Christ who lives in me. But most recently, the thing that's really struck me, and that's actually become the theme for Exodus 90 and 2026, is chapter 3 from the book of Exodus, verse 12. And it's the Lord responding to Moses's, all of his self-doubts, all of his concern about his natural abilities, perhaps his past, to lead God's people. And, what God says to him, he says, "But Moses, I will be with you." So that's my verse right now is I will be with you. And, the sign, so immediately after the verse, the Lord offers him a sign that he has been with him, okay? But the sign is in the future. And I love this, I think, especially within the venture, as you're venturing, starting something is, that the sign that I will have been with you is that you will return and worship me on this mountain. You will come back to Mount Horeb. That will be the sign that I was with you. And so Moses has to grapple with, a call to venture without its confirmation. It is, granted, but then they have to go on this 38-year journey, through the desert before they'll enter the promised land, as they journey through Numbers. So I just say that has just really struck me. And that's really what I try to actually bring into Exodus this year, not just for founders, but for our guys is, hey, when we generously seek the Lord and we seek to do his will, he promises to be with us. He doesn't promise us, material success. He doesn't promise us, health. He doesn't promise us a long life. He does promise us to be, doesn't spare us from tragedy and death and really hard things. But he does promise to be with us, now and into the future. If we venture and we keep persevering in his love. So yeah, that's my favorite scripture right now, Exodus 3:12.
I like that a lot. You've already mentioned it, but I will still ask you, who's your favorite entrepreneur? Maybe besides Jason and David.
Yeah, I'd say those guys. So, okay, I will say I have to be honest, but it's also I know this is not super, I don't know how acceptable this is in our space, but I've read Elon's stuff for a long time, before the rocket stuff was working, before X, before Tesla was really working either. So honestly, in 2015, I would actually go through there was one biography at the time by Ashley Vance, which
I haven't read
I
that
think
one.
Isaacson's is I think what you go to now, but at the time I would go back to that story, especially when I was man, I don't know if this is working. And I was if this guy can do what he's doing on values that I don't fully agree with, on a vision that I don't think is quite whole or healed, it's surely I can venture with the Lord to try to do what I can to help men grow into greater personal freedom. So yeah, that's where I've returned.
Elon is a very common answer, and I think that it's one of those things. We had this discussion at one of our dinners in San Francisco we hosted, is about Steve Jobs, and people, the prevailing perception is typically that he was just he was very hard on people, right, to put it very lightly. And the argument is also you can draw out the goodness from this. Maybe in a lot of ways he was actually just calling people to do their best work because they were too lazy, right? And maybe he did it in a way that we wouldn't necessarily want to emulate, but the principle is there that he was drawing good things out of it. And it's the same thing with other entrepreneurs like Elon, is that we can imitate some of the things and appreciate some of the things, but we can also pray for him and hope for his conversion, because if we get him on our side, I think it'd be a pretty interesting outcome.
Yeah, no, I know my brother especially watches all the rocket launches and stuff, and I don't stay as close to him as I used to, and I've definitely kind of gravitated more towards Jason and David, just because it's just more relatable. I can't relate to so much of his stuff, but I would agree. His story is a really sad one. There's really profound, early age attachment stuff from a psychological perspective it just comes out all the time, and I don't know, I don't envy that situation.
Right.
And I don't judge it either. It's just it doesn't sound great to me most of the time.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, I agree with that. What is your favorite saint?
St. John Henry Newman. There are many that I've graphed to at different times. St. Francis is there. St. Michael the Archangel is a patron. The Desert Fathers have always been an influence, but as we've gone deeper into that connection, and we'll go deeper in the future, so many of the great saints of the desert are remarkable. They inspire me so much. So there's these stories from the desert where, there's one in particular of an Abba, of Saint Arsenius, who was a brilliant man, an educated man. He was the tutor of the emperor's sons, actually. So he taught them, their grammar, their, all their liberal arts. They had this call from God to flee everything and go to be a peasant in Egypt. And, the movement into the desert was not a clerical movement primarily. There's just holy men and women just seeking to be radically conformed to God through a life of prayer, asceticism, and then these small communities. And, at the end of Arsenius's life, there's this incredible story about how someone stumbles into his cell and sees him entirely consumed by a flame. And, when he realizes that someone is there, he tries to hide it and all this stuff. And he's very kind of embarrassed about the whole thing. And when you read that story, it's so easy, obviously, in a modern mentality to be like, oh, that's some kind of exaggeration or whatever. And actually, what the Desert Fathers, and this is through Bishop Eric's teaching, have helped for me to do is to, not to say that there were not particular graces and special graces, but Arsenius responded to them. And he took the Lord as far as he would go with him. And he was consumed by a flame. And I think the desert tradition, and I mean, even more recent, I mean, people that, Desert Father-like people, there are similar kind of accounts of this. And it's just, I think it actually shows us, made in God's image, transformed through the sacramental life of the church. I mean, we are capable, of participating in the burning bush, participating in the pillar of fire. And that just inspires me so much, because I look at my life today and there's so many ways in which it's so far from that and quite mediocre. And without sounding hard on myself, I don't mean it in that way. I know what the Lord is capable of doing with souls who are faithful to him. And I want to be found to be like that.
I mean, man, you got to stop, man. You're gonna make me cry on this podcast already. But I think that's really powerful, that story. And I think, one comment I just want to make. I know we're trying to wrap it up here, but it's very interesting to me to see this huge trend of especially young men wanting to do something great, right? The podcast, How to Take Over the World. You've got founders. A lot of people are really into history right now. They're like reading about history's great men. There is this desire to greatness, and it's innate to all of us. But the only true greatness is pursuit of sainthood, right? And it's really interesting to me that there's the desire that comes because it's built into us as being created in God's image and likeness. Like he's given that kind of natural seed, if you will, and then it's taken and misconstrued to an extent because the devil's like, okay, well, if they're gonna desire greatness, I don't want them to desire that, so let me move them elsewhere and pursue earthly greatness or building some estate to pass on to their kids. Like all these things are relatively noble when done for the right reasons, but their pursuit is in the wrong way. And this is just so interesting that we can tell these stories of the saints that are, like you said, not believed. People wouldn't believe the idea that this guy's consumed with that person probably did psychedelics before they walked in the room or something like that, right? All these nonsense things that we just want to say, oh, that can't be real, because we've been convinced that the spiritual realm is not real. Except for, some people will criticize, more woo-woo people who say, oh, the spiritual realm is so real, and they've got it wrong as well. But once we have that lens of truth, it's just so interesting and motivating that we can pursue these things with the lens of truth, and it just makes you fulfilled more. Like you hear these things, and I don't know about you, but whenever I hear these types of stories, it just really gets the hair standing on my arm, and I just start to really get moved for no reason in particular. You don't know why. It's just because it's true and because it's beautiful, right? So I appreciate you sharing that, man. I'm excited to be diving into Exodus. Again, this is only the second time I've done it, but hopefully I'll hear more of these stories in doing it. So last one, and then we'll wrap up. What is your favorite devotion, maybe outside of Exodus 90?
This is a really simple one, but just right now, the Rosary is really back in my life. And it was a big part of my journey in the beginning when I was a boy. I found myself returned to the Rosary and to that time with Our Lady, and grateful for it. Grateful for its repetitions, its monotonies, its being able to bring to the beads, wherever I am, up or down, and just finding a place in the hands of our Mother. So it's not super novel or unique. No. It's just that's where I am right now.
The Rosary is steady Eddie. It's the best one, right? My friend TK Coleman will always promote the Rosary. He's really good at it. I love watching him cook whenever, especially like we're at an event or something, and there'll be Protestant, and he'll invite him to pray the Rosary with us, and he's always got an extra. Right? He's always got some great lines too. So you should meet TK someday if you haven't already.
The other thing I would just say quickly, it's not really a devotion, but it's more of a kind of a repetitive prayer. I picked this up from Luigi Giussani, who is the founder of Communion and Liberation, which was an ecclesial movement out of Italy that's still thriving, all all over the world. But he, I found out, would say the words Veni Sancte Spiritus, Veni Per Mariam on repeat. And at least a friend of mine that was in CL said he'd say this thousands of times per day. And so it's come Holy Spirit, come through Mary. And so I love that. I don't say it thousands of times. I often forget, when I'm not having great days, I say it less than on the good days, kind of a thing, to just be honest. But I do try to go back to that. And I love the idea of, the Holy Spirit, coming to us, through the generosity of Mary's yes. And I don't know, I've just really resonated for when I go inside, there are crevices in my mind and heart that I need the Holy Spirit to come to fill.
Mm-hmm.
And
Amen.
That's borne some fruit, and so I just try to say that as many times as I can. But I don't keep count or anything, so.
That'd be vanity, right? To keep count, right? Awesome, man. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I knew this would be a good conversation, even though you're, at the end of your media tour, getting things ready for launch. But I'm very confident that you're not going to ask me to throw this one in the trash. We're gonna post this thing. So this is
Oh
really good.
man.
Any final calls to action for people aside from sign up for Exodus 90?
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, everything we do is all on the Exodus 90 app. That's where we are, and everything, is all about growing in freedom, with the support of other men who are striving after similar ideals. So it's simple, you can get started, invite a few friends and get going. I'd say the other thing is we did this series in the Desert Fathers throughout the last year, which you can find on all the players and on YouTube and stuff. Bishop Eric from Norway, Bishop Eric Varden, is a real light, and he's written a couple of books. Gosh, I mean, so I read them all on repeat. Shattering of Loneliness is probably my favorite, as a wonderful, beautiful book on chastity, which teaches about that virtue and really just the relationship of man and woman in such refreshing terms. Honestly,
I love that.
it's really helpful, I think, for us, especially in the United States, to kind of have someone from the outside who is also an abbot, a monk before he became a bishop, teach. And he's also just plainly brilliant. If I can talk about him without hopefully him finding out.
Nice.
So yeah, I would just say like his writings are good. He has a blog called Coram Fratribus, which is also just amazing. Writes on there a couple times per week. So those are just a couple places that I would point to people. All of those things have been blessings in my life, and happy to share them, and hopefully they're useful to others.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I'm sure it will be helpful. Anybody who listens with an open mind will definitely get quite a lot of value out of this, and I think that's always the core thing with content, right? It's like whatever you're consuming, you're reading, you're listening. If you don't listen with an open mind or listen intently, you're not going to receive the benefits you could, right? And it's the reason why you can read the Bible hundreds of times and get different outcomes every time you read it, or deeper outcomes, or be pulled in different ways. So, anyways, man, we've said a lot. We'll leave the rest to God. Thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Silas. God bless you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this conversation with Jamie. First off, for the men listening, if you feel you have some attachment to the things of this world, sports, sugar, social media, excessive indulgence in food broadly, this could be a great thing for you to do. Hundreds of thousands of men have become uncommonly free through participating in Exodus 90. I highly encourage you to consider participating with a group of men starting Monday. We have a small group with Catholic founders that are doing this, and I highly encourage you to do this. This will be my second time doing it. It's been a number of years since I last did it, but I believe this is the time for me, and I think it's the time for all of us to find ways to make more space for God in our life. Regardless if you do plan on participating in Exodus 90, ask yourself this: what is your level of attachment to your business? Are you attached to the feeling of success, to a high income, to the recognition that you receive? Ask God to purify those desires for you and make plans and efforts to pursue freedom from those desires. You can't just will it. If you want it, you cannot achieve it without effort. As you leave us, welcome God into your heart as you do all this. And remember that no matter how well developed your spiritual life is, there is always a level deeper that you can go. What are you going to do to take that next step to go deeper in love and understanding of God? All right. Happy building, everyone. Stay tuned tomorrow for the Saintly CEO. We've got a surprise for you on Tuesday as well. And then our regular episode comes out on Thursday. God bless and happy building.